"Show me your ID," barked Officer Brad Miller, shoving Aaliyah back. She tried to explain, but the insults kept coming. The tension was about to break until the doors burst open and her mother, Chief Naomi Carter, stormed in. Would she watch or strike back? Monday mornings at Ashton City Hall were supposed to be quiet. Just the hum of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of papers, the echo of footsteps on cold marble floors. But for 17-year-old Aaliyah Carter, this morning felt like a test. She had dressed with care, crisp white shirt, black slacks, polished shoes, the kind of outfit that said, "I belong here." In her arms, a folder pressed tight to her chest, holding her entire scholarship application. Weeks of work, years of dreams. Her mother, Naomi Carter, had sent her off with the same reminder she'd given her since middle school. Be polite, but don't let anyone make you small. And just before Aaliyah stepped inside, her phone buzzed. "Good luck, baby. Call me when you're done." She smiled faintly at the text, tucking the phone away. She didn't know it yet, but she'd read those words in her head 100 times before the day was over. The lobby smelled faintly of burnt coffee and paper dust. The lights above were a pale, cold blue. Near the metal detectors, 2 uniformed officers leaned on the counter, talking low. Her footsteps slowed. She didn't want to, but her eyes caught theirs. Officer Brad Miller, tall and broad, with a smile that was more a baring of teeth, and Officer Kevin Doyle, thinner eyes, sharp as glass. Brad's gaze slid from her face to the folder in her hands, then back again. His smirk deepened. "She's not on the list," Brad muttered to Kevin, just loud enough for her to hear. Kevin snorted, never taking his eyes off her. "Doesn't matter. She'll still have to go through us." Aaliyah's fingers tightened around the folder. She forced her steps forward, willing her voice to stay steady. "Good morning," she said softly. Brad's smirk didn't move. "Morning. State your business. I'm here to submit my scholarship application." "For the mayor's office," she replied. Brad leaned an elbow on the counter. "Uh-huh. And you thought you could just walk in?" Kevin chuckled under his breath. She swallowed, keeping her mother's words in her head. "I have the documents right here. The deadline is today." Brad's eyes narrowed slightly. "We'll see about that." He looked at Kevin again, and that silent exchange between them felt heavier than words. Something in the air had shifted. She could feel it in her chest, like the hallway behind her had just grown longer, and the way forward was narrowing to a single guarded point. She had no idea that what would happen in the next few minutes would change how everyone in this building looked at her. Brad's voice sliced through the lobby like a whip. "Hey, you step over here." Every head turned. The hum of quiet conversations, the shuffle of papers, all froze for just a beat. Aaliyah's steps faltered. Her eyes flicked toward the security lane ahead, but Brad Miller, broad-shouldered in his Navy uniform, was already motioning her over with 2 sharp jerks of his hand. She hesitated. "Me? Yeah, you." He barked like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Before she could adjust her grip, Brad's hand shot out and yanked her tote from her shoulder. The force jolted her off balance, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Gasps came from somewhere in the crowd, not loud, but enough to remind her she wasn't invisible. "Watch it," she started, but the words died in her throat. Kevin Doyle, leaner, but with that same smirk that could curdle milk, was already unzipping the bag. He dug through her belongings like he was panning for gold, pulling items out one by one and holding them up for display. "Well, look at this," Kevin said, twirling a blue pen between his fingers. "Gel ink. Fancy." Brad, now holding her folder, flipped it open without a word. His eyes skimmed the top page, then his mouth twisted. "Aaliyah Carter, 17, senior at Ashton High." His voice carried easily across the lobby. "Lives on? Jefferson Heights. Figures." A couple of people in line exchanged looks. Jefferson Heights wasn't just a poor neighborhood, it was the neighborhood people whispered about with pity or judgment depending on the day. Kevin's grin widened. "Scholarship, huh?" He tapped the application packet with a finger. Bet it's one of those diversity freebies. Good for you. His tone dripped with mock congratulations. They both laughed short, sharp, and mean. Aaliyah's cheeks burned, but she stood still, gripping her own arms as if holding herself together. Her mother's voice floated up in her mind again. Be polite, but don't let anyone make you small. Brad slapped the folder shut, then tossed it onto the counter. The corner caught on the edge and tore slightly. Oops, he said without an ounce of apology. Guess you'll need to try harder next time. A woman in a gray blazer, mid-40s, paused on her way through the security gate. Her eyes narrowed at the seam lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment, Aaliyah thought the woman might step forward. But the moment passed. She looked away and walked on her heels, clicking faster than before. Silence from the bystanders pressed in like a weight. It was the kind of silence that screamed, I saw nothing. Kevin pulled out a small bottle of lavender lotion from Aaliyah's bag, turned it in his hands, then set it down harder than necessary. Travel size. You going somewhere important? His voice was almost sing-song, but the edge in it was sharp. No, she said softly. What's that? Brad cupped his ear. No, sir. That's better. He leaned closer, his bulk casting a shadow over her. You planning on being in here long? Might want to keep your attitude in check. Her fingers itched to grab her folder back to shove it into her bag and walk away. But the two uniforms between her and the checkpoint made it clear she wasn't going anywhere until they decided she could. Somewhere near the far end of the lobby, Marcus Reed, tall, dark suit badge at his belt, slowed his pace. He'd been heading toward the elevator's phone in hand, but his eyes narrowed at the sight of Brad and Kevin crowding the young girl. He didn't step in. Not yet. But his thumb hovered over his phone screen, the faint click of a camera app, breaking the momentary hush. Aaliyah noticed him only in the corner of her eye. Her focus was on keeping her breathing steady, on not letting her hands shake. Kevin dumped the last of her belongings, a neatly folded scarf, 2 pencils, and a slim paperback novel onto the counter. Light reading, he said, turning the book over to check the cover. Oh, this one's about civil rights. Figures. Brad chuckled, but his eyes stayed on her face. Something funny? No, she said. You sure, 'cause you're looking at me like you've got something to say? I don't, she replied, each word clipped but steady. For a beat, they just stared at her like cats deciding whether to keep playing with a trapped mouse. Then Brad shrugged and stepped back. All right, guess you can go through, he said. He didn't hand her the bag, he dropped it onto the counter, forcing her to scramble and gather her things. As she slid her folder back into place, she noticed the torn corner again. A small thing, maybe, but in that moment, it felt like a wound. She turned toward the checkpoint, the eyes of the lobby still on her back. Somewhere behind her, Kevin muttered something under his breath that made Brad laugh again. Marcus Reed's gaze followed her. His phone was still in his hand, but now it rested at his side. The faint crease between his brows deepened. He'd seen enough to know this wasn't just a random bag check. And judging by the way Brad and Kevin smirked at each other, they thought it was over. They were wrong. Brad turned something over in his hand, letting the overhead light glint off it. Aaliyah's pen. Just a slim, silver gel pen spun between his fingers like it was a weapon. Well, he drawled, holding it up for everyone within earshot. Possible weapon, huh? His tone wasn't just sarcastic. It was designed to make her small, to turn a harmless object into a public accusation. Kevin stepped in front of her, blocking her path like a wall. His lips pulled into something halfway between a grin and a sneer. If you can't explain why you've got this, we might need to take you in, he said, voice pitched just loud enough for the crowd to hear. Aaliyah blinked at him. It's a pen, Brad chuckled, shaking his head. She's probably here to make trouble, he announced louder this time, tossing the words into the air like bait. The murmur in the lobby shifted, people moving a little farther away, eyes flicking between her and the officers. Some wouldn't look at all, suddenly fascinated by their phones. Others stared openly, the kind of curious that's part fear, part entertainment. A couple of younger people, phones held low, had already hit record. From the far side, Marcus Reed's posture stiffened. He'd been watching, weighing the moment, but now his phone was up, camera steady. The lines in his face deepened, not just anger, but calculation. Kevin stepped closer, his breath brushing her ear as he spoke. "Let's make this easy. Step over to the private check area. I already went through." Now he interrupted, pressing a hand lightly but firmly against her shoulder, steering her toward the side. In his other hand, he clutched her scholarship folder like it was evidence in a criminal case. Brad followed, still twirling the pen. "You people never learn, do you?" The words landed like a slap. Her mother's voice was nowhere now, only the pounding of her heart in her ears. Her hands trembled at her sides, fingers curling into fists she didn't dare raise. Her lips pressed together, holding back whatever reply wanted to escape. The taste of copper sat faintly on her tongue, not blood, but the kind of metallic tang that comes when you bite back too hard. Brad glanced at the crowd and smirked, knowing full well the show he was putting on. Her eyes stung the burn of tears threatening to surface. She blinked fast once, twice, willing them away. She wouldn't cry here, not in front of them, not in front of everyone. Marcus shifted position, angling himself so the camera caught Brad's hand gripping the pen, Kevin's palm on her shoulder, and the way she stood, not defiant, not crumbling, but holding herself together in the middle of the storm. "All right, sweetheart," Kevin said, mock gentle. "We'll just have a little chat. Make sure you're not a danger to anyone." "I'm not," she began, but Brad's voice crashed over hers. "That's what they all say." The crowd's attention pulsed in waves, some people leaning in, some retreating, some still pretending they saw nothing. The smell of burnt coffee from the lobby cafe hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sharp tang of disinfectant from the security checkpoint. The pen gleamed in Brad's hand as he flipped it once more before sliding it into his pocket. For safekeeping, he said the lie hanging there for everyone to hear. Kevin guided her another step toward the corner of the lobby, past a pillar where fewer eyes could follow. Her scholarship folder remained tucked under his arm, the edge still torn from earlier. The lobby noise had resumed in pockets, printers whirring from an office, the low murmur of conversations, but around them it felt like a bubble of thick, charged air. Aaliyah's throat tightened, but she forced herself to stand straighter. If she gave them the satisfaction of shrinking, she knew they'd push harder. Brad leaned just close enough so only she could hear his voice, a low growl. "Don't look at your little audience. They won't save you." She didn't. Her eyes stayed forward, fixed on a scuff mark in the tile. From across the lobby, Marcus's camera didn't waver. He wasn't just filming anymore. His other hand was already tapping a text, quick and deliberate. Kevin glanced back at Brad. "You think she's carrying anything else?" Brad shrugged. "Wouldn't surprise me. Look at her, already nervous. That's guilt." A flicker of movement in the crowd caught Aaliyah's eye. One of the bystanders was edging closer, phone up, recording from another angle. Brad noticed, too. His mouth thinned. "Move along, folks. Nothing to see here." But there was something to see, and everyone knew it. They'd steered her into a quieter corner of the lobby away from the main flow of people. The noise faded here, no footsteps echoing, no chatter, just the low hum of the building's air system and the distant whir of a printer. Kevin's eyes dropped to her shoes. "Take 'em off," he said flatly. Aaliyah blinked. "What shoes?" he repeated, impatience curling his tone. "Need to check 'em." She looked down at the plain white flats on her feet. "Why I already protocol?" Kevin cut in. "Or are you refusing to cooperate? There was no protocol for this. Anyone watching could see that." But Brad had planted himself right at the only open path back to the lobby arms, folded his smile, a mix of arrogance and challenge. "Come on," he drawled. "You don't have anything to hide, right?" Something in her shifted. For the first time since they'd stopped her, Aaliyah lifted her chin, meeting Brad's eyes. Her voice was quiet but steady enough to carry. I've done nothing wrong. It wasn't loud, but it landed a single stone dropped into a still pond. The silence that followed seemed to stretch too long even for this tucked-away corner. Inside, her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Her palms were slick with sweat and her head felt light, almost detached. She could hear her own breathing, quick and shallow. But she didn't look away. Brad's smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker, a tiny narrowing of the eyes. He tilted his head like a cat watching prey try to stand its ground. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice dropping low. Then he jerked his chin toward a narrow hallway. "Room 2, now." The hallway led to the small interrogation rooms used for security concerns. Everyone in the building knew they were where trouble went to disappear for a while. At the reception desk about 20 feet away, Maya Lopez froze mid-keystroke. She was young, maybe 23, with a nervous energy she usually hid well, but now her hands shook just enough that the phone in her palm trembled. Her eyes darted between Aaliyah and the officers. She knew Brad's reputation and Kevin's, and she knew this wasn't going to stop unless someone bigger stepped in. Under the cover of adjusting her headset, she typed a quick text, her thumb flying. "We have a problem. It's bad." She hit send before she could think twice. Kevin caught a flicker of movement from the desk and glanced over. Maya snapped her eyes back to the monitor, but his brow furrowed. He took a step toward her. Then, someone from the far end of the lobby called his name sharply. "Doyle, we need you over here." He hesitated, suspicion still etched on his face. But duty, or the appearance of it, pulled him away. Brad stayed where he was, still blocking Aaliyah's path, still wearing that smug, unshakable grin. "Guess it's just you and me for now," he said. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her inside a cramped, windowless room. Aaliyah stood there for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the dim fluorescent light. The air was cold, not the kind that wakes you up, but the kind that seeps into your skin and lingers in your bones. Behind the glass, Brad's voice carried in from the hallway, low but sharp enough to cut. "Kids like that need to learn. Make an example out of her." Kevin chuckled, the sound dripping with the same ugly certainty. "Yeah, she'll think twice before pulling anything like this again." Aaliyah lowered herself onto the hard metal chair in the center of the room. Her palms were slick, but she clenched them in her lap, refusing to rub them against her jeans. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her shake. Out in the lobby, Maya Lopez's pulse raced as she pressed her phone to her ear, turning her back to the security cameras. "They've got a young black girl locked up," she whispered, her voice tight. "And it's ugly. Real ugly." There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice, low, calm, and edged with steel, answered, "I'm across the street. 10 minutes." The certainty in those 4 words hit Maya harder than she expected. Whoever this was, they weren't just coming. They were coming with purpose. Maya kept her head down as she turned toward the hallway, shoving her phone into her pocket. But before she could get far, Kevin stepped into her path, his brow creased. "Who you calling?" "My mom," Maya said, without missing a beat, forcing a sheepish smile. "She's picking me up for lunch." She didn't wait for his reply, just slipped past him, her heart hammering like she'd just stepped off a ledge. Inside the holding room, the seconds felt heavier. Aaliyah focused on the muffled hum of the building, each sound magnified in the stillness. Somewhere a door slammed. Somewhere else a printer sputtered. And just beyond that locked door, the men who had dragged her here were moving pieces she couldn't yet see. In the main lobby, Marcus Reed's camera caught every angle, Brad pacing with his arms folded, Kevin glancing over at Maya's retreating figure. He sent another short clip to her phone along with a message, "You're gonna want this." Maya's screen lit up as she ducked into an empty corridor. The video played in her hand, Brad holding Aaliyah's file like it was contraband, Kevin smirking in the background. The audio caught Brad's voice, clear as glass. "You people never learn." Maya didn't flinch. She hit send, forwarding the clip to the same number she had called minutes earlier. Back in the holding room, Aaliyah closed her eyes. She had no idea that at that very moment, a chain reaction had already begun, one that would bring the outside world crashing through the doors of this place. All she knew was that the silence in the room was too heavy, and the cold in her hands was spreading. She took one slow breath, then another. Somewhere beyond these walls, something was coming. She could feel it in the air like the first drop of rain before the storm. And she wasn't wrong. A call away. They led Aaliyah into a cramped holding room, 4 walls, 1 table, 2 chairs, and a heavy door that clicked shut behind her. The air was cooler here, almost too cold, carrying that faint metallic scent of recycled ventilation. She sat forcing her knees to stay still, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing her shake. She glanced around for a clock and found none, only a faint, warped reflection in the brushed steel tabletop. The deadline's today. If they kept her here an hour, the work she'd spent months preparing could be wiped away in silence. Her phone was somewhere outside that door, her folder in their hands. She pictured her mother's last text. "Call me when you're done," and felt the ache in that word, done. She wasn't done. Not like this. Brad's voice bled through the door, low but clear enough. "We make an example out of her." Kevin chuckled, the sound flat and dismissive. "Yeah, one of those who thinks the rules don't apply. Disorderly, maybe trespass. People forget public buildings aren't open doors." "Write it tight," Brad replied. "She'll fold." This wasn't about security. It wasn't about policy. It was personal, and they were confident. That quiet kind of confidence you hear from men who've done this before and gotten away with it. Out in the lobby, Maya Lopez's hands were trembling as she slipped behind the front desk partition. She kept her voice low as she dialed, eyes fixed on the doorway to the holding area. "They've got a young black girl in the security room," she said. "And it's ugly." The voice on the other end didn't waver. "I'm across the street. 10 minutes. Do not let them move her," the caller added, flat, decisive. "Keep eyes on her. I'm walking." "Yes, ma'am," Maya said before she could stop herself. The honorific slid out on instinct. She ended the call and exhaled the hallway, seeming to tilt for a moment, fear and relief arriving together. This wasn't just someone. It was the one person these officers would least want to see. Maya tucked her phone away, but Kevin's shadow filled the archway before she could move. "Who you calling my mom?" she said without missing a beat, forcing her tone into something casual. "She's waiting for me to pick her up." Kevin's gaze dropped to her pocket. "You know the policy about phones at the desk." "On my break," she said, voice dry as paper. He leaned in half a step enough to test her nerve. "Stay out of this, Lopez." "I plan to," she replied, stepping sideways into the light of the lobby where cameras and people could see. Back in the corner near the vending machines, Marcus adjusted his phone, making sure the recording frame stayed steady. He zoomed in on the hallway leading to the holding rooms, catching a partial view of Brad pacing. With a quick flick, he sent another clip to Maya, the file name auto-tagged with a timestamp. Then he switched angles wider this time, catching the doorway, and hit record again. A uniformed security guard glanced at him, but Marcus lowered the phone to waist level without breaking frame. A small vibration buzzed in his palm. Uploading to cloud. Insurance. If anyone asked later, this wouldn't just be a story told. It would be a timeline. Inside the holding room, Aaliyah pressed her palms flat on the cold metal table and counted her breaths the way her mother had taught her for exams: in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It didn't slow her pulse, but it kept the panic from taking the wheel. She tried to block out the muffled voices beyond the door, but certain words cut through charge paperwork lesson. Her throat tightened. She'd seen videos of situations like this spiral, but watching from a distance is nothing like sitting in the chair yourself, feeling the weight of the door behind you. The hum of the fluorescent light above seemed louder now, the flicker in one corner blinking in an unsteady rhythm. She imagined her mother's reaction if she could see her here alone, locked in, surrounded by men who saw her as a problem to be solved. And yet, she wasn't completely alone. Somewhere out there, Maya was moving. Marcus was filming, and someone important was crossing the street. Brad's voice sounded closer now, right outside the door. "She's gonna crack. They always do." Aaliyah lifted her chin. She might have been scared, but she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of hearing it in her voice. In the lobby, Maya glanced at the entrance just as the heavy glass doors sighed open. A shift in the room's air followed, subtle but undeniable. The kind of change you feel before you hear the footsteps. Measured, quick, certain, crossing marble like a metronome. Not hurried, not hesitant, coming closer. The metallic click of the lock was so sharp it seemed to slice through the air. The door swung open, not fast, not loud, but with the deliberate precision of someone who owned every inch of the ground they stepped on. Naomi Carter walked in like the room had been waiting for her. Navy blue suit, perfectly pressed nameplate catching a flash of light. Her heels struck the tile in slow measured beats, each one louder than it should have been in that small space. Brad straightened instinctively like a soldier caught off guard. He didn't know her, but something in his posture betrayed it. He felt her authority before she even spoke. Kevin's frown deepened, suspicion flickering in his eyes. His voice was low, wary. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Naomi didn't answer him. Her eyes locked on Aaliyah, and for a moment the rest of the room faded. She closed the distance in 3 strides, stopping just close enough to shield her daughter from view. "Are you hurt?" Her voice was calm, but it carried an edge so sharp it could cut glass. Aaliyah shook her head, still stunned. "No." But Brad took a step forward, the smirk returning to his face. "Ma'am, this is a restricted." Naomi's hand came up, not high, not fast, but with the quiet finality of a judge striking a gavel. She turned her head toward him slowly, her gaze locking on his like a vice. "I wasn't talking to you," she said, voice low, deliberate. The smirk faltered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Brad muttered, but it sounded less certain than before. Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "And you have no idea how true that is." Kevin shifted, his weight eyes darting between them. "Look, you were just what Naomi cut in the slightest raise in her tone, making the room feel smaller. Harassing a young woman because you could, trying to prove a point." Silence. Aaliyah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom." Naomi didn't take her eyes off the 2 men, but she reached back and rested a steady hand on her daughter's arm. "I'm here now." Out in the hallway, Marcus's camera caught everything. The moment Brad's jaw tightened. Kevin's arms uncrossed, Maya's breath hitched. Power was shifting, and they all knew it. Inside, the air had changed. The walls no longer pressed in on Aaliyah. Instead, it felt like the pressure had turned on Brad and Kevin, and Naomi wasn't about to let it ease. The air in the security room was thick, the kind that made every breath feel like it might shatter the silence. Naomi Carter didn't walk in, she claimed the space. Her presence filled every corner before her voice even touched it. "I'll need your incident reports," she said, her tone cool but carrying the weight of authority and a copy of all security footage from the last 2 hours. Brad barely lifted his head from the desk, feigning focus on a pile of files. "We're in the middle of an active inquiry, ma'am," he said, leaning back like he owned the room. "Things will be processed in due course." Naomi didn't blink. She stepped closer, her heels clicking with the precision of a metronome. From the inside pocket of her jacket, she pulled a black leather wallet and flipped it open. The light caught the gold lettering like it was scripted for the moment, Director, Internal Affairs Division. The room stopped breathing. Kevin's eyes darted to Brad, then back to Naomi. His jaw slackened. Brad's smirk faltered, replaced by a twitch in his throat as he swallowed hard. Naomi's voice was soft, almost gentle, but it cut like glass. "I sign your paychecks. Sit. Down." Brad didn't move at first. Maybe it was pride, maybe stupidity, but his fingers clenched the edge of the desk like he was anchoring himself to the last shred of control. Naomi held his gaze until he broke. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered himself into the chair. Kevin followed suit, sliding into his seat like he'd suddenly remembered how gravity worked. Naomi's eyes scanned the monitors on the wall, the blinking red lights marking active recordings. "You will call the inspection unit," she said, every word deliberate. "And you will keep this scene exactly as it is. No one touches a thing. No one edits, deletes, or misplaces any evidence. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Kevin muttered. Brad gave a single, tight nod. From his spot near the door, Marcus adjusted his camera and swung the lens toward Brad. The officer's head was bowed now, his earlier bravado stripped away. Through the viewfinder, Marcus captured the precise moment the balance of power shifted the look of a man who realized the ground under him had just given way. Aaliyah stood a few feet away, her back still against the wall. She wasn't saying anything, but her eyes, they were alive. The shock from moments earlier was giving way to something else, a quiet, swelling pride. Her mother had walked into this room like a storm, and now the very men who'd tried to intimidate her were scrambling to follow orders. Brad tried one last time, his voice low but edged with frustration. "Director Carter, I'm sure there's a misunderstanding here." Naomi turned her head toward him slowly, her expression unreadable. "The only misunderstanding, officer, is that you seem to think you're still in control." His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked away. Marcus caught that too. In the corner, one of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably, the creak of his chair sounding almost deafening in the stillness. Naomi noticed, but didn't address him. Her focus stayed locked on the two men who'd just been dethroned. "You will make the call," Naomi repeated. "Now." Kevin reached for the phone, his hand trembling slightly as he punched in the extension for the inspection unit. His voice wavered as he relayed the request the way a man's does when he knows someone else is listening and judging every word. While Kevin spoke, Naomi stepped closer to Aaliyah. She didn't touch her, didn't need to, but she looked her over from head to toe. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her tone softening just enough for the words to land like a mother's embrace. "I'm fine," Aaliyah said, though her voice caught slightly. Her eyes darted toward Brad, then back to her mother, almost in disbelief that the situation had turned so quickly. "Good," Naomi replied, turning back toward the desk. "Then let's make sure the truth comes out." Kevin hung up the phone. "Inspection units on their way," he said. "Good," Naomi answered. "You'll wait here until they arrive. All of you." No one argued. No one dared. Marcus panned his camera one last time, catching the reflection of Naomi's badge in the glossy surface of the desk. The set of her shoulders, the silent message that radiated from her stance, "This is over, and you lost." Somewhere in the hallway, footsteps echoed fast, purposeful. The sound seemed to draw the walls closer, the air tighter. Everyone knew what was coming next. Naomi glanced toward the door, then back at Brad. "When they walk in here," she said quietly, "you'll answer their questions, truthfully. Or the next office you see will have bars on the window." Brad didn't respond. He just stared at the desk, the flush of humiliation creeping up his neck. Aaliyah exhaled a slow release she hadn't realized she'd been holding in. Naomi had turned the tide without raising her voice, without stepping out of line, just by standing firm and knowing exactly who she was. And everyone else in that room knew it too. The truth comes out. You could feel it before you saw them, the shift in the air, the subtle stiffening of shoulders. Then the door opened, and the inspection unit filed in their presence like a cold front sweeping through the room. No small talk, no wasted steps. Bradley Mason, Kevin Doyle. The lead inspector's voice carried the weight of procedure and finality. "Weapons and badges. Now." Brad's lips pressed into a thin line. For a second I thought he might refuse. The man lived off defiance, but Naomi's gaze pinned him where he sat. With slow, jerky movements, he unholstered his sidearm, set it on the table, and placed his badge beside it. Kevin followed suit, avoiding everyone's eyes. The metallic clink of their guns landing on the table seemed louder than it should have been, like punctuation to a sentence they didn't want to hear. Maya, the lead investigator, stepped forward, her folder already open. She didn't waste time. "We've received multiple accounts of what happened here today. I'm going to need to hear your statements and review the footage." Brad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like the teenager who just got caught skipping class. "There's been a misunderstanding," he muttered. Maya didn't even look at him. Instead, she turned to Naomi. "Do you have your report?" Naomi nodded toward the corner where Marcus stood ready. Marcus. Before Marcus could move, Maya placed a flash drive on the table. "We also have a preliminary video submission from a civilian witness. But first..." She tapped her laptop and the screen on the wall flickered to life. "We'll play the official security footage." Kevin shifted in his chair. His hand resting on the desk twitched. It was a small movement easy to miss unless you were watching him. He glanced toward the secondary terminal in the corner, the one still connected to the building's system. His fingers inched toward the keyboard, but Maya's phone chimed one short buzz. She checked the screen and smiled faintly. "Actually, let's start with this." She plugged in a second drive. "Marcus, thank you for sending this directly to my secure line." Kevin froze. His hand slid back into his lap. The video filled the screen. It wasn't the sanitized fixed-angle feed from the security cameras, this was close, unflinching handheld. Marcus had caught every detail, the shove, the raised voice, the way Brad's hand had tightened on Aaliyah's arm. The camera didn't blink, neither did the room. Brad's jaw slackened as the footage rolled. Kevin stared down at the table, his ears turning red. When the clip ended, the silence was heavier than any shouting match could have been. Then, from the back, a voice spoke low, almost reluctant, but impossible to ignore. "This isn't the first time." Every head turned toward the officer who'd said it. His gaze stayed on the table, but the truth hung in the air like smoke. Maya's eyes narrowed. "Care to elaborate?" The officer didn't respond, but the damage was done. The implication was there, raw and dangerous. Naomi stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the steel in it. "Effective immediately, both of you are suspended from duty pending a full investigation. Your access to all departmental systems is revoked. Internal Affairs will be conducting a complete review of your case history." Brad opened his mouth, but Naomi didn't give him the chance. "You will remain in this building until escorted out by security. Do you understand?" Kevin gave the faintest nod. Brad just stared ahead, his face pale and tight. Maya gathered the evidence, sliding the drives into a sealed bag. "We'll be in touch with the formal statements. In the meantime..." She looked toward Naomi. "You've got the authority to lock this down." "I do," Naomi replied. "And I will." The inspection unit began collecting items, weapons, access cards, even their department-issued phones. Watching Brad and Kevin sit there, stripped of the badges that had once been their shields, was like seeing a fortress crumble brick by brick. Marcus, still filming, caught the moment Brad finally broke eye contact, looking down at his empty hands. It was small, but in that room, it felt like the sound of a gavel hitting the block. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood steady and certain as the truth finally landed where it belonged. Healing and pride. The storm had passed, at least for now. The private lounge was quiet, almost too quiet after the chaos of the last few hours. The hum of the air conditioner and the faint ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds filling the space. Naomi sat on one end of the small couch, Aaliyah across from her, their eyes meeting in a silence that didn't need to be broken right away. No uniforms, no shouting, just two women who had walked through fire and come out the other side. Naomi finally leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. Her voice was softer now, but there was a thread of steel running through it. "I wanted you to see," She said that even without me standing beside you, you're stronger than they think. Aaliyah blinked, her lips parting slightly as if the words took a moment to land. She didn't rush to answer, and when she did, her voice was steady, but her eyes shone. I'm strong because of you. The corner of Naomi's mouth lifted just barely. It wasn't a smile meant for the cameras or the crowd. It was the kind that stayed between family. The door eased open, and Maya stepped in. She didn't bring the heavy air of the investigation with her this time. Instead, she carried a quiet respect. I just wanted to check in before I head back to headquarters, she said. Aaliyah stood crossing the room to meet her. Thank you, she said simply, and it wasn't just for the last few hours. It was for the way Maya had walked in and believed her, no hesitation, no sideways glances. Maya gave a small nod, her eyes warm. You didn't need me to believe you, she replied. You needed me to prove it. And with that, she let herself out, closing the door gently behind her. Naomi's phone buzzed on the table. She reached for it, but it wasn't a call, just a message. From Marcus. Check the news. Aaliyah frowned. What is it? Naomi turned the screen so she could see. There it was, Marcus's footage playing on a major news outlet's live feed. The headline blazed across the bottom: Internal Affairs launches full investigation after shocking video surfaces. They watched in silence as the clip replayed the same moments they'd lived through, now playing for the entire country to see. The public would have their opinions. The department would scramble. But in that small room, it felt like the world had finally seen what they'd been forced to carry alone. Naomi leaned back, exhaling slowly. Looks like the truth doesn't stay locked up for long. Aaliyah's gaze stayed on the screen a moment longer, then she turned back to Naomi. Neither do we. The message that lives on. It was one of those days where the air itself felt heavier, like the whole city was holding its breath. The marble steps of City Hall gleamed under the late afternoon sun, but all eyes were on the podium set at the top. Naomi stood there, no uniform this time, just a tailored navy suit that spoke of authority without needing to shout. Beside her, a wall of cameras clicked and whirred their lenses, hungry for every detail. When she stepped up to the microphone, the noise died down to nothing. Over the last week, she began, her voice carrying the kind of calm that comes from conviction. Our city has been reminded of a truth we should never forget. Racism doesn't disappear because we wish it away. It must be confronted, and it must be dismantled. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Behind the press barricade, Marcus's viral footage was still fresh in people's minds. The clip had been replayed on national news, dissected on talk shows, and shared across millions of screens. Naomi didn't pause long enough for the moment to drift. Today, I am announcing a new zero-tolerance policy on racial discrimination within our police department. This is not symbolic. This is binding. And it begins now. Applause broke out, sharp, deliberate, and full of something more than approval. It was demand turned into momentum. She glanced to her left where Maya stood. Detective Maya Ortiz. Naomi said demonstrated the courage and integrity that this city should expect from every officer in uniform. She did her job with honor, and for that she has my gratitude and the gratitude of this community. Maya's cheeks flushed as the crowd applauded, but her posture stayed humble. And then, almost without drawing attention, Naomi's gaze shifted to the right. Aaliyah stood there tall and unshaken, her eyes steady on the crowd. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The quiet pride in her expression told its own story, one the cameras would capture and the city would remember. Naomi let the moment breathe before delivering her final words. Respect, she said, her voice deepening, is not a gift. It's a right, and we will protect it together. The crowd erupted, the kind of sound that rolls like a wave and lingers even after it's gone. Minutes later, the press conference wound down. Naomi stepped away from the podium, Aaliyah moving with her. Together, they walked down the City Hall steps into the warm glow of the setting sun. Shadows stretched long across the stone, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the whole city had paused to watch them. The cameras followed, but neither looked back. The message had been sent, and this time it was going to stay. Stories like this remind us that respect, justice, and courage aren't just ideals. They're the choices we make every day. If this story moved you, I'd love for you to give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one here on Mr. Mac's Stories. Your support isn't just a number, it's the reason we keep digging deep to bring you powerful, meaningful stories that matter. Together, we're not just listening, we're remembering, we're learning, and we're standing up for what's right. And here on Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe every story leaves a mark. Let this one be ours.